Enjoying your evening so far?
They say Chicago winters don't just freeze your skin, they freeze your soul. Tonight, the wind was screaming against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the gilded Lotus, but inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and impending death. I had 45 seconds before the dessert spoons hit the table and the bullets hit his chest. He sat at table 4, Jae-Hyun Park. A man carved from obsidian and cold command, the undisputed king of the city's underground. Beside him, Sophia, Italian mob royalty, leaned in with a smile that looked like love but tasted like cyanide. 20 minutes ago, I heard her order his execution in the wine cellar. I'm just Elara, a waitress with a dying mother and a mountain of debt. I should have walked away. But as I approached his table, my hand shaking against the tray, I realized I couldn't watch another person be extinguished. I slipped a folded receipt under his whiskey glass, 7 words that would either save his life or sign my death warrant. Your life ends when the dessert arrives. Welcome back, my fierce hearts. This is a story of unearned mercy and the dangerous man who refused to let me go. Grab your coffee, dim the lights, and let's begin. The silence at table 4 was a physical weight. I set the Glenfiddich down, the crystal clinking softly against the marble-topped table. Jae-Hyun didn't look up at first. He was the kind of man who commanded a room simply by breathing. His suit was Tom Ford, blacker than a moonless night, and his hands, large, powerful, and scarred at the knuckles, were folded calmly. Sophia was laughing, a melodic, porcelain sound that made my skin crawl. She touched his arm, her red nails looking like drops of fresh blood against his sleeve. I felt the heat of his presence, an aura of controlled violence. As I slid the coaster toward him, my thumb pressed against the back of his hand. It was a violation of every service rule, but I needed him to look at me. His eyes snapped to mine. They weren't just dark, they were calculating, like an architect measuring the structural integrity of a building he was about to demolish. He didn't pull his hand away. He felt the paper underneath. I mouthed one word, read. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched from the waiter's station. Jae-Hyun didn't reach for the note immediately. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving Sophia's face. He was hunting her while she thought she was hunting him. Then, with a movement so fluid it was almost invisible, he dropped his linen napkin. When he pulled it back up, the note was in his palm. I saw the moment the words hit him. His jaw tightened, a split-second fracture in his marble mask. He didn't panic. He didn't reach for a gun. Instead, he looked back at me. It wasn't a look of gratitude, it was a look of ownership. At that moment, I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was a witness. I was a target. The air in the restaurant felt like it was being sucked out of the room. I looked toward the bar. A man in a charcoal suit was nursing a drink he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Near the kitchen, 3 busboys were standing too still, their hands buried deep in their jackets. The clock was ticking. The kitchen was already prepping the baked Alaska, the signature dessert. The flames were coming, and so was the lead. If you're holding your breath like I am, hit that subscribe button right now, we're just getting started. I'd like to propose a toast, Jae-Hyun's voice carried across the quiet restaurant. It was smooth, conversational, and utterly terrifying. He stood up, towering over Sophia. The tension at the table was a live wire. Sophia blinked, her perfect smile flickering like a dying light bulb. Darling, we haven't even had the flambé yet. Sit down, you're making a scene. I think the scene is already written, Sophia, he replied. He reached out and gripped her wrist, not with affection, but with the strength of a closing trap. He looked at her wine glass, then at his whiskey. Let's switch. A show of total trust before our wedding, wouldn't you say? The color drained from Sophia's face, leaving her looking like a wax figure. She knew the whiskey wasn't poisoned, the hit was supposed to be loud and messy, but the psychological shift broke her. She stammered, trying to pull her arm back. That was the signal. The man at the bar didn't wait for dessert. He stood up and pulled a suppressed submachine gun from beneath his coat. Get down! Jae-Hyun roared. He didn't dive for cover alone. He lunged across the table, his hand catching the collar of my uniform and yanking me behind the heavy mahogany bar just as the first spray of bullets turned the floor-to-ceiling windows into a rain of diamonds. The sound was deafening, the high-pitched scream of glass, the thud of lead into wood, and the terrified shrieks of the elite diners. Everything turned into a kaleidoscope of chaos. I was pressed against the cold floor, the smell of spilled gin and expensive perfume filling my nose. Jae-Hyun was over me, his body acting as a shield. He felt like a mountain of warm muscle and iron resolve. Stay low, he hissed into my ear. His breath was hot, a sharp contrast to the freezing Chicago wind now howling through the shattered windows. He pulled a sleek, black handgun from an ankle holster. He didn't look scared, he looked bored, like this was just another Tuesday. He fired 3 shots over the bar. 3 precise cracks. I heard 3 bodies hit the floor. Sophia? I gasped, looking toward the booth. Sophia is gone, Jae-Hyun said, his eyes turning to obsidian. And now, Elara, so are you. Because once you save a man like me, the world doesn't let you go back to being a nobody. We didn't leave through the front. Jae-Hyun led me through the service tunnels, his hand a permanent fixture on my arm, guiding me through the dark with the confidence of a man who had memorized the blueprints of every building he entered. We burst out into the alleyway, the Chicago winter hitting us like a physical blow. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, coating the trash bins and the black asphalt in a deceptive layer of white. Wait, I gasped, my lungs burning from the sudden shift in temperature. The police, we should find the police. Jae-Hyun stopped so abruptly I slammed into his chest. He didn't say a word. He just pointed toward the end of the alley. A single police cruiser sat idling, its blue and red lights off, swallowed by the shadows of the elevated train tracks. A man stepped out, adjusted his cap, and pulled a suppressed pistol from his holster. It was Detective Miller. I'd seen him in the restaurant before, always getting his meals comped, always shaking hands with the owner. Miller, Jae-Hyun's voice was a low growl. Jay, Miller shouted back, his voice unnervingly cheerful. You were supposed to be dead 5 minutes ago. Sophia said the Italians wanted it clean, but I told her you were too stubborn for clean. My stomach dropped. The law wasn't here to save us, they were the cleanup crew. Miller stepped forward, the snow crunching under his heavy boots. Behind him, 2 more officers stepped out of the shadows, their faces obscured by the brims of their hats. They weren't calling for backup. They were forming a firing line. The girl, Miller said, nodding toward me. Is she a witness or a trophy? She's mine, Jae-Hyun said. The weight of that statement sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Before Miller could raise his weapon, Jae-Hyun acted. He didn't fire at the cops, not yet. He kicked a heavy metal trash lid toward them, the clang echoing like a bell in the narrow space, and grabbed a flare from his pocket. He struck it, the blinding red magnesium light turning the alley into a bloody nightmare. In the confusion, he fired 2 shots into the cruiser's gas tank. The explosion wasn't like the movies. It was a heavy, rhythmic thump followed by a wall of heat that singed my eyelashes. We didn't wait to see if Miller survived. We ran into the whiteout. Before we see where they hide, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss a heartbeat of this story. The safe house was a penthouse in a building that looked like it should have been condemned decades ago. The elevator groaned as it climbed to the top floor, and when the doors opened, I expected dust and decay. Instead, I stepped into a world of cold marble and high-tech security. This was Jae-Hyun's fortress. He collapsed onto a leather sofa, his breath coming in ragged hitches. Now that the adrenaline was fading, I saw the damage. His white shirt was soaked through at the shoulder, the fabric a deep, angry crimson. "You're hit," I said, my voice trembling. I dropped the apron I was still wearing, my waitress persona finally falling away. "It's a graze," he lied. His face was pale, his eyes hooded. In the kitchen, 3rd cabinet. Medical kit. I moved on instinct. My mother's illness had turned me into a makeshift nurse over the years. I found the kit. It was more like a portable surgical suite. I returned to him and began to cut away the expensive silk of his shirt. As the fabric fell away, I gasped. His body was a map of his life, scars from blades, old bullet wounds, and tattoos in intricate Korean script that looked like ancient poetry. The wound on his shoulder was deep. I worked in silence, cleaning the blood, the scent of antiseptic sharp in the air. Jae-Hyun didn't flinch, not even when I began to stitch the skin. He just watched me. His gaze was heavy, predatory, yet strangely vulnerable. "You have steady hands, Elara," he whispered. "I've had practice," I said, focusing on the needle so I didn't have to look at the intensity in his eyes. "My mother. She's lived in a hospital bed for 3 years. I've learned how to fix things when the doctors aren't around." When I finished, I looked up. We were inches apart. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the hum of the heater. He reached out with his good arm and traced the line of my jaw with a thumb that felt like velvet-covered steel. "Why save me?" he asked. "You knew who I was. You knew I was a monster." "Because even monsters deserve a chance to choose their end," I replied. He didn't answer with words. He leaned forward, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that tasted of whiskey, salt, and the high-octane heat of survival. It was a dark, desperate thing, a claim. In this house, in this city of ice, we were the only 2 people left alive. The heat of the kiss was interrupted by a low, rhythmic pulsing sound. Jae-Hyun pulled away, his eyes snapping to a bank of monitors hidden behind a sliding mahogany panel. The red lights were flashing. The perimeter had been breached. "They're here," he said, his voice dropping an octave. The vulnerability from a moment ago was gone, replaced by the stone-cold killer of Table 4. "Sophia knows my haunts. She's smarter than I gave her credit for." He stood up, ignoring the stitches I just put in his shoulder. He walked to a painting on the wall, a bleak, abstract landscape, and swung it open to reveal an armory. Rifles, handguns, and grenades were lined up with terrifying precision. "I can't do this," I whispered, backing away. "I'm just a waitress, Jae-Hyun. I'm not like you." He turned, holding a small, silver pistol. He walked toward me, his movement predatory and smooth. He didn't stop until he was in my personal space, his heat radiating off him. He took my hand and pressed the cold metal of the gun into my palm. "You saved a man like me," he said, leaning down so his lips were against my ear. That mercy has a price, Elara. The Italians won't ask you if you're just a waitress before they put a bullet in your head. They will kill you just for having my blood on your hands. I looked down at the gun. It felt impossibly heavy. I don't want to kill anyone, I sobbed. Then aim for their legs, he said, his voice hardening. But if you don't pull that trigger when the door opens, you're choosing to die. And I didn't survive a restaurant massacre just to watch you become a corpse in my living room. He walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city was a glittering throne of lights, but tonight, it looked like a cage. Sophia is coming for her crown, he muttered. And Miller is coming for his payday. We have 10 minutes before they hit the floor. We need to move to the secondary exit. He grabbed a tactical vest and threw it to me. Put it on. From this moment forward, Elara, you don't look back. You don't think about your debt or your rent. You think about breathing. Do you understand? I nodded, my fingers trembling as I buckled the heavy vest. I was no longer a waitress. I was a fugitive. Are you Team Elara or Team Jae-Hyun? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. We didn't go down the elevator. Jae-Hyun led me to a narrow crawlspace behind the wine cellar, a secondary staircase that led directly to the building's industrial laundry room. The air here was hot and humid, smelling of bleach and old steam. Suddenly, the door at the end of the hall kicked open. Sophia stepped through, but she wasn't the elegant fiancée anymore. She was wearing a leather tactical jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She held a suppressed machine pistol in her hand like she'd been born with it. "Jay, darling," she called out, her voice echoing off the damp concrete walls. "You always did love the dramatic exit. But you're getting predictable." Jae-Hyun pushed me behind a row of industrial dryers. "Stay there," he commanded. He stepped into the light, his hands empty but his posture relaxed. "You killed your own father for a seat at the table, Sophia. Did you really think you could kill me with a few waiters and a crooked cop?" Sophia laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "My father was old. You were just a distraction. The Italians and the Koreans, we were never going to be partners, Jay. We were always going to be rivals. I just used the engagement to get close enough to see where the armor was thin." She pointed the gun at his heart. "And then this little waitress ruined everything. Where is she? I want to see the face of the girl who cost me $1 billion merger." "She's already gone," Jae-Hyun lied. But Sophia wasn't alone. Miller stepped out from behind her, his face bruised and singed from the alleyway explosion. He spotted my reflection in the chrome of a dryer. "She's right there," Miller yelled. He raised his gun toward my hiding spot. I didn't think so. I didn't breathe. I remembered what Jae-Hyun said, aim for the eyes. I didn't aim for his eyes, but I pulled the trigger. The silver pistol kicked in my hand, the recoil vibrating up my arm. The bullet hit the industrial steam pipe right next to Miller's head. A jet of scalding white steam hissed out, blinding him instantly. He screamed, dropping his weapon as he clawed at his face. Jae-Hyun didn't miss his opening. He drew his own weapon and fired 2 shots. Sophia dived behind a concrete pillar, cursing in Italian. "Run, Elara!" Jae-Hyun yelled. He grabbed my hand, and we sprinted toward the loading docks, the sound of Sophia's gunfire chasing us into the night. The south side docks were a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and abandoned cranes. The Chicago River was a black, churning abyss, filled with chunks of jagged ice. The wind here was a physical force, trying to push us into the water. We reached a small, nondescript fishing boat at the end of Pier 19. It looked like junk, but I could hear the low, powerful thrum of a high-performance engine beneath the deck. "This is the way out," Jae-Hyun said, his voice strained. His shoulder was bleeding again, the white bandages now completely soaked. Before we could step onto the boat, headlights cut through the darkness. 3 black SUVs roared onto the pier, tires screeching as they formed a semicircle, trapping us against the water. Miller was there, half his face covered in a makeshift bandage, his eyes wild with a mixture of pain and greed. "End of the line, Park," Miller shouted over the wind. "Give us the girl and the drive, and maybe I'll let you jump into the river instead of putting a hole in your head." Jae-Hyun turned to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted flash drive and a thick envelope. "This drive has the bank codes for the accounts I set up for you. The envelope has your new passport. The boat's GPS is set to a safe house in Michigan." "What?" "No," I shook my head, my eyes filling with tears. "I'm not leaving you." "Elara, look at them," he said, gesturing to the men stepping out of the SUVs with rifles. "They don't want you. They want me. If you stay, you're just another body. If you leave, you're the only person who knows the truth." He stepped toward the pier's edge, shielding me from their line of sight. He looked at me one last time, and for a second, the mafia boss was gone. There was only the man who had tasted my mercy and decided it was the most precious thing he'd ever known. "Go," he whispered. "Don't look back. Every second you stay here is a second I have to worry about you instead of killing them." He shoved me toward the boat. I fell onto the deck just as the first volley of gunfire erupted. Jae-Hyun didn't hide. He stood his ground, 2 guns blazing, a silhouette of defiance against the frozen river. "The final chapter is coming up, hit that bell so you don't miss the ending." The boat's engine roared to life as the automated system kicked in. I scrambled to the controls, my hands slick with Jae-Hyun's blood. Through the rear window, I watched the scene on the pier. It was a symphony of fire and shadow. Jae-Hyun was a ghost, moving between the shipping containers, drawing Miller and the Italians further away from the water, further away from me. I saw him take a hit to the leg, saw him stumble, but he kept firing. He was a man who had accepted his death long ago, and he was taking as many of them with him as he could. "Jay!" I screamed, but the wind swallowed my voice. The boat pulled away, the gap between the pier and the hull widening. I saw Miller reach the edge of the dock, his gun aimed at the boat. He was going to finish me. But then, a figure lunged out of the darkness behind him. Jae-Hyun tackled Miller, the 2 of them crashing into a stack of oil drums. A spark hit the leaking fuel. A massive orange fireball erupted, illuminating the entire docks in a sickly, beautiful glow. The shockwave rocked the boat, nearly throwing me overboard. When the smoke cleared, the pier was a ruin of twisted metal and licking flames. There was no sign of Jae-Hyun. No sign of Miller. I sat in the captain's chair, the boat navigating itself through the icy black water of Lake Michigan. I opened the envelope he'd given me. Inside was a passport with my photo but a different name, Clara Vance. Underneath the passport was a handwritten note on a piece of Lotus-themed stationery from the restaurant. "You gave me 45 seconds of mercy. I'm giving you a lifetime of freedom. Don't waste it on a ghost." I slumped against the wheel, the tears finally coming. I was safe. I was rich. I was free. And I was completely, utterly alone. The man who had carved a path through hell to save a waitress had vanished into the fire, leaving me with a bag of money and a heart that felt like it had been turned to ice. 6 months later. I live in a small town on the coast of Maine. The air here smells of salt and pine, a world away from the smog and blood of Chicago. My mother lives in a beautiful care facility 3 miles down the road. She recognizes me now. She's getting better. I work in a library. It's quiet. No one shouts. No one carries a gun. I go by Clara, and I'm the woman who never talks about her past. But every night, I sit on my porch and watch the waves crash against the rocks, and I think about Table 4. I think about the way the light caught the amber in his whiskey. I think about the weight of the silver pistol in my hand. I think about the fact that the news never reported finding a body at the docks. They found Miller's badge. They found Sophia's car. But Jae-Hyun Park remained a ghost. One evening, a black sedan pulled up to the library. My heart stopped. I felt that familiar, cold dread crawl up my spine. A man stepped out, wearing a suit that cost more than the library's entire budget. He walked up to the desk and set a book down. It was a book on Korean poetry. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a businessman. He pushed a small, folded piece of paper toward me. "A friend wanted you to have this," he said, his voice neutral. He turned and left before I could ask a single question. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the paper. It wasn't a receipt this time. It was a napkin from the Gilded Lotus. On it, in familiar, sharp handwriting, were 4 words. "Dessert is being served." I ran to the window, but the sedan was already gone, disappearing into the Maine mist. I looked down at the note. My heart, which I thought had frozen shut on that pier in Chicago, began to beat with a frantic, terrifying hope. He was alive. He was coming. Or perhaps, he had never left. I walked to the door and turned the sign to closed. I didn't know if he was a monster or a savior, but I knew one thing for certain: when a man like Jae-Hyun Park finds you, you don't run. You wait. Because some loves aren't meant to be lived in the light. They are meant for the shadows, for the cold winters, and for the 45 seconds that change everything. The snow eventually covered the blood on the docks, but it could never cover the memory of that night. They never found Jae-Hyun's body. The police called it a mass casualty event, a gang war that spiraled out of control. But I know better. I'm sitting in a small cafe in a city whose name I'm still learning to spell. My mother is in the room next door, sleeping soundly after a surgery that cost more than a diamond mine. I have a new name, a new face, and a bank account that never seems to empty. But every time a door opens, every time I hear the clink of a whiskey glass, I look up. I look for the man who told me he loved me too much to watch me bleed. I look for the monster who became my savior. Jae-Hyun Park might be a ghost to the rest of the world, but to me, he's the reason I'm still breathing. Was it worth it? Would you have slipped him the note? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to see more stories of dangerous, passionate love, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Stay safe, my dreamers. I'll see you in the shadows.